I'm Emily Weiler with the Montana Public Health Training Center. We're here at the University of Montana in Missoula, and we're super excited to have Jennifer with us today for this neurodiversity in the workplace training. And so I'll be here the whole time. And so even if my camera is not on, I'm here. I'll be managing the chat. So if there's questions and you don't want to unmute and ask them, put them in the chat. I'll make sure they don't get missed. And if you need anything else or there's any tech difficulties, just give me a holler. If you get booted for any reason, no problem. Go back, click that link. I'll let you back into the training. So with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer and away we go.
Good morning, everyone. Can you give me just an indication if my sound is coming through okay? Just a thumbs
good.
up.
Oh,
it sounds good. Yeah.
You sound great. And again, Jen, whenever you're ready, I'll put up that poll as well.
Okay, do you need me to stop sharing?
No, you're good. It can sit on top.
Okay, so go ahead. Emily has a poll that she'd like to start with, so go ahead.
Oh, hold on. It's got me logged in funny. It might take me a second. Where did it go? There it is. Okay. My little kerfuffle earlier with my sharing. Well, it might take me a second to bring it up. So feel free to chat about other things or keep putting intros in.
I'll just start with an introduction of myself.
Perfect.
And who I am, and then there's a good pausing point to do the poll. So today we're going to talk about neurodiversity in the workplace. We're going to talk about what neurodiversity is, the benefits of including people that are neurodiverse in our employment settings. And then I think the reason why you're all here is we're going to spend a large amount of time talking about the supports for neurodiversity. And then at the end, I like to have some time for questions and problem solving. Everybody has these really unique areas. Sorry, I just realized that awful bar was there. And it would just be nice to have that opportunity to problem solve and learn from each other as well. Okay, so as we go through today, I just really encourage you just to unmute and ask questions or pop them in the chat. Emily agreed to help me monitor the chat. I do have two screens, and just so you know, actually, when my head's tilted this way, I'm actually looking at you. It looks a little weird, but when I'm looking here, I'm looking at my slides. So I apologize if you feel confused by that. I feel confused by it sometimes. So my name is Jennifer Schofer-Clausen. I am a recent recipient of an educational doctorate from the University of Montana. So recent that I'm still raw about it. So I don't want to talk about it very much. The dissertation was awful, so awful. I was telling Emily, I've been doing this for 27 years, as speech therapist, and I specialize in autism, but I also, I consider myself a specialist in neurodiversity as well. And mainly just because there's so much overlap. So I'm not only an employee of the University of Montana, and I'm in the speech language hearing and occupational sciences department. You know, it's a really big name. I also have started a business called Yeti Consulting, and today I'm here as a representative of Yeti Consulting, and the only one. I'm the only member. It's okay. I'm fine with it. And what I do with my consulting business is I actually go into schools and workplace and support people in how to help their neurodiverse learners. And I have an interesting model where I go in and
There we go. I appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share it. So you should be able to see it now. And thank you for that. That gives me an idea of where we're at.
So we do have kind of a mixed crowd of people understanding. It sounds like people are on the side of understanding what the benefits are of neurodiversity in the workplace. And then it looks like we have a mix of knowing how to support our colleagues and friends. So it sounds like we're in the right place. Everybody's here for the right reasons. Okay. So I'm going to start with what neurodiversity is. So neurodiversity the term's been used since about 2013. I'm not quite sure who coined the term. However, it describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world in many different ways, and there's no one right way or wrong way of learning, behaving, sharing your information, sharing your thoughts, your views, ideas. We don't look at neurodiversity as a deficit. We look at it, or a disorder. We look at it as a diversity, as something that we shouldn't look at it neurodiversity as a deficit. We should look at it as a benefit. I think about how many amazing things in our world came out of broad, diverse thinkers. So when we are using the term neurodiversity, we're really talking about autism, ADHD, Tourette or syndrome, or tic disorders. There can be acquired neurodiversity through traumatic brain injury. People with depression and anxiety experience it. Stutterers, apraxia of speech, and I'm going to talk about what that is a little later. Dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia. So generally, there's like intact cognition. There's just a barrier that might be social skills or attention barriers, or something that keeps that person from expressing their ideas like everybody else, or the majority. So the area that I'm particularly versed in is autism, and I think I think this is where this is the group that's the hardest to integrate into our employment settings, and I think people can feel a little bit daunted by the diagnosis, and so I want to take away some of that. I want to demystify it a little bit and help you understand what autism is and where it belongs and how we can include people on the spectrum. So right now we're looking at 2% of the population is being diagnosed with autism. And what's interesting is, like in 2000, it was 1 in 150. So it's gone up significantly. A lot of people want to know why, and it is genetic. And there's other factors like advanced paternal age and things like that. There's not a mosquito bite or a virus or anything that causes it. We do see it more common in boys than in girls. And then you'll hear throughout this presentation, people use terms like Asperger's. We don't use those terms anymore. I'm going to tell you about the levels that we use for autism. But the thing is that if you were diagnosed as a person having Asperger's syndrome, that's still your diagnosis. And actually, in some areas, there's culture around that diagnosis. For example, in the UK, they call themselves Aspies, and they have clubs and groups, and they have a culture, kind of like the deaf culture. So just to be thoughtful about that. What's kind of different in Montana is we're not populous enough for those cultures to develop and flourish. So what's interesting is people think a lot of things are autism, and there's actually only 2 things that make up the diagnosis of autism. There are the social barriers. Social interactions and skills are hard for people with autism. And then the other thing is either they will have restricted interests. So thinking about, I have a client I work with, and he's an adult, but all his life it's been about trains. He's loved trains. Or they'll have repetitive behaviors. So I just ran a camp, 3 weeks of camp for kids with autism, and I see a lot of this when they're the happy hands, we call them. And it's just a repetitive behavior that serves no function. To them, it does actually. It feels really good, and I kind of get it. But you also can have the restricted interest and the repetitive behaviors, but diagnostically one or the other. So it's social, and then it's restricted interests and or repetitive behaviors. That's all autism is. So the past renditions of the diagnoses included language and things like that. And that's no longer accurate. If there's a language delay, it's considered a coexisting condition. So once a person is diagnosed to be on the autism spectrum, they actually will diagnose it by 3 levels now. So what used to be called Asperger's is now level 1. Okay, so level 1 is the person that has a lot of difficulty with social interactions. They're not really successful with them, but they're not but they still engage. And then they have difficulty with flexibility, and then that organization and planning and problem solving can be very difficult. The level 1 people with autism are definitely in our workforce, with or without diagnosis. So level 2, this is a little bit more of an involvement. Deficits in verbal and nonverbal social communication skills. So their language is more impaired. Those social interactions are more challenging. And then the inflexibility is greater. And then the changes can cause distress or difficulty in changing attention. So some people on level 2 will live independently, some people won't. And then level 3 are our colleagues and friends that are most impacted by autism. A lot of the kids and adults that I treat that are at level 3 have limited language. They may have one or 2 word long sentences. They may have to use an AAC device to communicate, or gestures, what have you. Social interactions just are not easy at all, and they tend to be avoided because they are so hard. And then a lot of inflexibility. So they thrive on routine. The more routine and structured they are, the happier they are. And then what we will see is a lot of large behavior if a routine is interrupted or if a communication attempt has failed. Are there any questions about autism or the levels of autism before I move on?
I have a question. This is
Sure.
Kathy Moore.
Hi, Kathy.
Does level 3 encompass the things that came before in level 2 and level 1? Would you think of it
Yeah.
in that way?
Yeah, it actually is just a progression. The symptoms are just much more severe at level 3, where level 1, you might not even know somebody's on the spectrum at level 1. Level 3, it's very apparent that they're on the spectrum. You know, I just had a little guy that was level 3 this last week, and he surprised me. I walked in and he goes, "Jen!" And I'd never heard him say my name before, but I didn't hear it for the rest of the week either. So, you know, it's just really impairing. And the barriers are not only cognitive, but like the motor skills. So they have a hard time making their mouth form words and things like that. So they just have a lot going on. So ADHD, I think we're all fairly familiar with ADHD, and ADHD is just that difficulty with focus and shifting focus, and then the impulse control. However, our friends with ADHD are, first of all, they're the most fun people. And secondly, they are the ones with the best ideas, and they see things and synthesize information very quickly. And I just feel like these are the people that have so much to offer. Tourette syndrome, this is a disorder where there's tics. So somebody might have involuntary movements or say things involuntarily, and it interferes with their life. Traumatic brain injury is simply that there was an injury to the brain and it resulted in cognitive or communicative challenges. Depression is something that, first of all, the pandemic has made a little bit more prevalent than it used to be. But it's a persistent feeling of sadness. And the concern about depression is the threat of death by suicide. And what's interesting, what you're going to learn through this talk is how all these disorders actually end up overlapping a lot too. So a lot of young adults that have autism, they are actually in the highest group to experience death by suicide. Because of the coexisting conditions of depression and anxiety. So anxiety is that persistent worry, and it can be a real barrier, and it can ebb and flow, and it can result in physical manifestations and be really can really interfere with one's life. Stuttering, we also use the term disfluent, is when a person has a hard time getting their words out. So you might hear them start their sentences over and over again or repeat words over and over again. And it can be really interfering with employment opportunities. So apraxia speech is really interesting. And this is a very common coexisting condition of people with autism, where they may have the words in their brain, but the wiring from the brain to the mouth, there's a breakdown. There's a short wire, for lack of a better analogy, and they have the thoughts, they can't make this work to say them. What's hard for the community at large is we totally judge people by their language. And so if you're not talking, we're kind of assuming that you don't have a lot to say. And hopefully today, maybe your lens about that might change. Dyslexia is very common, and it's an interruption in the process of learning how to read and activities affiliated with reading. Usually with dyslexia, vision is fine, cognition is fine. It's actually the language and auditory processing areas that are challenged. So, and actually, for some of you might not know this, but speech therapists actually treat dyslexia. Dyscalculia is that breakdown with math. Dyspraxia is, we had apraxia, which was speaking. Dyspraxia is fine motor movements. So those are hard for a person with dyspraxia. I always think of, I have like this kind of little file of disorders in my head. And when I think of dyspraxia, I remember this 2-year-old I used to work with, and she was turning this knob, but this hand was turning too. So she couldn't separate her actions between the hemispheres of her brain. And then dysgraphia is that handwriting component of trying to form those letters is hard. So when we look at the statistics, neurodiversity is impacting up to 20% of our workforce. So that means if you work with 5 people, one of you has neurodiversity. It may or may not be apparent. And what we also have to remember with these statistics is that they're layered. So all of these, to be honest, all of these are coexisting conditions that are common with autism. So if you have autism, you may have a learning disability, not traumatic brain injury, that's acquired, but depression or anxiety. The one that I see the most is, because I work with young adults at the university with autism that are going to U of M. And the one that I see most is autism with ADHD. Were there any questions before I went on to the brain differences? So I think where I'm leaning as a professional is, I think if I can explain why, we can be more understanding as a community. And I was really kind of excited to see that there's so many people from the healthcare world, because it's like, oh, this is going to be like right up their alley. So particularly with autism, there are some very specific brain differences that happen. Now, what I want to remind you is they don't, so what happens with the brain differences is that you can have one of the brain differences, or you can have all of the brain differences, and you can have some of the brain differences, and it'll create a constellation of symptoms that can be autism plus all the coexisting conditions. So challenges with the development of the corpus callosum, that's what does our left-right communication. So with the corpus callosum, there's communication between the left and right brain. And if this is part of the constellation for that person, they're going to have difficulties with motor skills, sensory dysfunction, learning differences, and storage and retrieval of information. A lot of people don't know, I think a lot of you do, but about synaptic pruning. And throughout our lives, we're actually born with twice as many neurons in our brain as needed. And throughout our lives, we prune down to about half. However, for some people with autism, that doesn't happen. And so they have a lot of inefficient pathways in their head. And if they don't go through a full pruning process, they're going to have limited learning potential, poor information retrieval, and inefficient learning. Whoops, I don't know what I did there.
Jen, there's a question.
Yeah.
And she says, a question for when it makes the most sense. How do adverse childhood events affect brain development?
Yeah, so that's a thing and it's also a thing that's out of my wheelhouse too. And Emily, this might be something you might want to consider for our future training, is trauma-informed care.
Oh, we've done quite a few of them.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's a good question. What we do know is from the research and the development of the ACEs, the more adverse adverse events that a child has had in their life, the more likely they are to have health problems as adults. Yes, Bonnie, stimming is the same as repetitive behaviors. Yeah. Yeah, you're correct in that. But you know, there's been situations where I've worked with a kid and I've heard, oh, ACEs is not specific to neurodiversity. I think we're going to find a whole new realm of research coming with relation to events and the development of neurodiversity. I worked with a little guy and I saw videos of him. He was talking, he was typically developing, and then he had this accident and it was very traumatic. And it was right at one of those critical stages. And then he wasn't talking and he had autism. And I just don't know if like there can, and I think we still need more research, but can there be a predisposition and then an event happens and it triggers the onset of the autism? So many times you'll hear it, like even in Temple Grandin's story, that she was doing fine and then one day it all changed, right? And we hear those stories. And I think we need more explanation as to why that happens. These are great questions. I love these questions, by the way. And I'm sorry I can't speak more to trauma. However, I'm glad that I love these questions. You guys are in the right space for this. With the white matter are those networks that connect the brain and the gray matter. And if there's a problem with the white matter, just like that neural pruning problem, you'll have difficulty with joint attention, social challenges, but the one thing about the white matter is if it's impaired, we know that that person will respond better to visual supports for their learning. The gray matter is where we store memory and language, and that's where like that abstract thought, creativity, judgment, emotion, attention, all that abstraction lives in the gray matter. And if there's a problem in that area, that person's going to experience problems with memory, language, concrete thinking, emotions, and attention. So boy, these all sound like the symptoms of autism, don't they? The amygdala one is one that I actually find very important. And the reason why I think it's important is our amygdalas, first of all, they haven't been researched really well, but they're important for memory, decision-making, and emotional response. However, if there's under or overdevelopment of the amygdala, that child or adult is going to have a hard time with motivation. And so it makes learning or performing very difficult. And then the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is what all these neurodiversities have in common. And it's where the executive functioning lives. And what happens is if it's involved, which almost always it is, there's difficulty with prediction, choice making, social interactions, and the ability to compare and contrast items. The left temporal lobe is important for language, visual memories, and emotional processing. And if that's impacted by the disorder, they're going to have difficulties with language and memory and emotions. Those are all very typical of people with autism. And the fusiform gyrus, it actually is at the bottom of the brain. And it's another one that's not well researched, but it does perform functions with visual processing, face recognition, detail recognition. And people with those problems will have a hard time with faces and emotional content. And I find this very interesting because so many of my clients won't recognize me until they hear me talk. And then on top of it, you add masks. This has been really hard for my clients going through the pandemic. And so there's actually a term for it. I have a friend that actually has it. It's called prosopagnosia, and it's called face blindness, and people don't recognize faces. So if you're not recognizing faces, you're not going to see emotions, right? So this is one of the big barriers that our friends and colleagues with autism have. So what we have to remember is, and it's just a recalibration of ourselves and a reminder, is that we can't treat people like the neurodiversity as their fault. What the outcomes are is they're symptoms of their brain structures. And if we can recalibrate and remember that, we can be better at supporting them. I think what can be hard is that it does come across as lack of motivation and lack of interest. And it can be just because sometimes people on the spectrum have little facial expression, so it looks like they're apathetic. And if we can change our lens, maybe we can be better supporters of those folks. So Karen, that's such a great boy, I have a whole 3-hour training on that one, Karen. Yeah, so executive dysfunction is not a diagnosis. That's what's interesting. It's actually behavioral. It comes out in behavior. So task avoidance, not starting an assignment. That's what executive dysfunction looks like. So we actually don't diagnose it. We actually diagnose them with behavior challenges. So, and behavior is not synonymous with autism. If you were with Danielle and I these last few weeks and you saw some of these sweethearts that we worked with, you would just really want to wear a t-shirt that says don't equate autism with behavior problems because they're lovely, lovely people. That was a great question, and I do have more trainings on executive dysfunction. Such a fun area. Ask Danielle, she just spent 3 weeks doing it. So this video that I'm going to share with you today is so powerful, and I put the link at the bottom of the PowerPoint. See, there's that word retrieval. And what I can do at the end is throw it in the chat for you if you want to open it up. But if you're like needing to communicate with your employees why neurodiverse people need to be on your team, this is the video that will do it. So let's enjoy this.
Neurological differences like autism or ADHD are considered to be dysfunctional disorders and disabilities under the medical model of mental health. There's too little attention given to enabling people with neurologically different minds to be accepted for themselves, to discover and celebrate their strengths, and to find a place in society that values their differences. When most of us think of diversity, we think of things like race or sexual orientation, but there's a different kind of diversity you might not know about: neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is the concept that neurological differences among people should be recognized and respected. I believe it's time for this new social movement, the neurodiversity movement, to take off. Neurodiversity is a part of our genetics and of our evolution as a species. The genes for autism and ADHD are not errors, but rather are the result of variations in the human genome that have and will continue to have advantages for society. One of the genes associated with ADHD, the DRD4 gene, is known as the novelty-seeking gene. It arrived on the human evolutionary scene over 10,000 years ago. Genes associated with autism also go back more than 10,000 years. Research suggests that genetic variants linked to autism might have been positively selected during human evolution because they contributed to exceptional memory skills, heightened perception in vision, taste, and smell, a precise eye for detail, and an enhanced understanding of systems such as animal behavior. These characteristics likely remain in the gene pool today because they are still advantageous. As a psychologist advising the parents of differently wired kids, I tell parents they have a choice between trying to change the child to fit the environment and changing the environment to fit the child. There are many different microhabitats and subcultures in our world. For an individual with autism or ADHD, finding success on their own terms may come from discovering the particular niche that fits best, the niche that allows their strengths to shine and their challenges to be minimized. Individuals with ADHD tend to thrive in situations of rapid change, variety, and that reward creativity and out-of-the-box thinking. A career as a comedian, detective, entrepreneur, journalist, actor, EMT technician, or photographer could be. I'm not saying that having autism or ADHD is easy. And I don't mean to downplay the real suffering that can be caused by having a neurodevelopmental condition, disability, or difference. But it's also time the world sees the beauty and value in brain differences. Neurodiversity might be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. My vision is for a neurodiversity tolerant and accepting society where differences are celebrated for the depth and dimension they bring to the human condition. I want children whose brains are wired differently to be encouraged to find their niche instead of changing to fit other people's ideas of normal. Diversity in every sense makes our world a better place, and people who think differently are a huge part of that.
Okay, we'll take a moment for any questions. Bonnie, I love that too. I just every time I try to put it in as many trainings as I do because I feel like it's my recalibration tool. Emily liked it too. That's great. It's powerful. Yeah, it's powerful. It's powerful. And just bringing people to the diversity of neurodiversity because it's not as evident as other diversities. Any other questions or thoughts or comments? So, you know, I wanted to tell you guys how fun this PowerPoint was to make, finding people in different working situations and putting them into my PowerPoint and thinking about all the potential that is out there and all the opportunity. And it made me really excited for my job. And like, I've been doing this 27 years and I still get really nerdy excited about it. But I want you to know that there's so many benefits to neurodiversity in the workplace. So statistically, 5.4 million adults in the US have autism. That's pretty significant, isn't it? 35% of adults with ASD attend college. Isn't that exciting? And actually, something you might not know about me is I started a program at the University of Montana 10 years ago called Mosaic, and I support adults with autism at U of M. And U of M is ranked the #7 autism-friendly campus in the country. So it's really exciting that we have this opportunity to support neurodiverse people. Here's the sad part. 85% of those people that got college degrees are underemployed. And it's heartbreaking, and there needs to be more support. And I'm really trying to work hard at it. But there's only one of me. Danielle's here, so I'm just going to recruit her after she graduates to come work with me. But we need more people in this area. But what we need to remember is hiring people with neurodiversity and autism is good for business, good for the broader economy, and good for society. So people with ASD will increase productivity and employee engagement. They lower turnover. Isn't like, man, we have so much turnover at U of M, and I'm like, if we could have a year where we kept everybody, I'd be so happy. You know, like turnover is really hard. And then it actually increases brand recognition, if you can believe it. And we'll unpack these just a little bit. Like talents, the benefits of people with autism is they can have highly focused interests, and they become their talents, and they become experts, and they have an attention to detail. So these are the people that become our engineers or our pathologists or our researchers. It's really specific, their interests, and they get in there and they utilize it. Now, I assure you that, Paw Patrol is not an interest that will follow a kid through their lifetime and like they'll become a Paw Patrol expert, but they will come into their own and they will find their niche, like that video demonstrated. What's really cool about having people with neurodiversity on your staff is it increases productivity. It can be due to their unique interests or skills. So if somebody's interested in trains and they are sorry, I lost the term. It's the guy that organizes the trains in the yard. Yard master. They're going to love their job and they're going to do it well. Because they like rules and it offers comfort, they're the employee that follows all the rules. And what we need to do, though, is like they can make great employees, but we have to be thoughtful not to abuse these special talents that they have. Like, I feel like people that are neurodiverse really struggle with work-life balance because they really get into their work. With people on the spectrum and neurodiverse, there's lower turnover. I found this an interesting statistic that turnover can cost up to 16% of that position's salary in a year. That's kind of crazy. Like, that's a lot of money. And then people with ASD have the preference for the same. So they're loyal. They want to stay there. If they're happy, they want to stay there. So they increase employee engagement because they become committed and loyal. Hiring people with ASD will increase profitability by 16%, lower absenteeism by 37%. That's fantastic. Increase productivity by 18% and reduce turnover by 6.5%. So this can be achieved by developing company values with relation to neurodiversity. So thinking about what your mission and statement is and how that includes neurodiversity. We've worked very hard to be inclusive over the years, but this might be an area that's been overlooked for us. Brand recognition. This again was a really interesting statistic to me. 79% of Americans want companies that support issues that are personal to them. So I just had to take my son to Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and of course we had to go to the Mall of America. Well, my son and I are Canadian. How many times do we go into Canada Goose? Brand recognition, you know. I see that maple leaf, I got to go look at it. What is it? I love it. If I see something designed for somebody, like ADHD impacts my family, if I see something that supports or is designed for ADHD, I'm there. I want it. I want to do it. With ADHD and autism, we definitely, all of us know somebody that has it or a family that's living with it. So I think we can all agree that we probably want to support those organizations. There's tax credits. So people that employ people with disabilities can earn tax credit for their small businesses. And then there's regulatory compliance issues. And this is interesting to me. Being Canadian, this is actually a huge part in Canada, but I didn't realize until I read it recently that there was compliance issues in the US, and that 7% of the workforce should have specialized needs. And then there's economic benefits. For that person that is self-sustained, that has a disability, it increases their mental health benefits, and that decreases the amount of supports they need. And then when we look on the bigger scale nationally, self-sustained people with disabilities reduce access to social systems. And the research shows that for every 1% of people with autism are employed, the US has a $1.2 billion savings per year. So that's kind of staggering when we look at it, right? There's societal benefits. Young adults with autism do have the highest rate of death by suicide. And people that are unemployed experience negative emotions 30% more than those people that are employed. And the research does show that employment can offset mental health issues. Also, that person on the spectrum, they deserve the same accomplishments, joy, and happiness as everybody else does. So giving them that gift of independence, belonging, self-sufficiency, joy, a cognitive outlet, you're giving them quality of life. And that's what's important. So next, we're going to be moving on to the supports. Are there any questions before we move on? Okay. And just remember, anytime you have a question, just pop in. So I'm a big advocate for supporting our neurodiverse friends and colleagues. this is another video I really, really like, and it just shows us the face of what neurodiversity is and that it really isn't much different. But I want to share this with you to help change your lens toward neurodiversity.
If a person were to say to me, wow, you're really good at thinking about concepts, for example, the equivalent of that for me would be to say to a person, wow, you're really good at breathing.
People think that you're thick.
They think that I can't read.
That we're dumb, that we're slow, we're uneducable. Actually, it's quite the opposite.
I'm neurodiverse because I am autistic.
I have something that's called Asperger's syndrome, which is an autistic spectrum disorder.
I'm dyslexic.
I have Asperger's syndrome.
I'm dyslexic and I also have dysgraphia.
I have dyslexia and dyscalculia.
I got an ADHD diagnosis a few years ago, and it was actually the first time in my life that I made sense to myself.
I just think it's the way my brain's wired up.
Just wired differently.
I am not seeing what everyone else is seeing. There's obviously a huge advantage to that, but we've only learned to appreciate this potential over the last few years.
One way of understanding neurodiversity is if we've got people who we call normal, we call them neurotypical, they can see the visual spectrum of colours going from red to indigo. Neurodiverse people, they might not be able to see blue, but they can see in infrared. Now you've got somebody in your team who can see in the dark. Do you want to have that person in your team? Of course you do.
Many of my strengths, I believe, come from my autism.
I'm good at retaining knowledge. I know where to find the knowledge.
My brain is incredibly logical. One of my main traits is I can take lots of different sort of level 2D drawings and then make them into a 3D model in my head and be able to spin them around.
I'm very good at spatial things. I built a kitchen in our house 12 years ago, bought all the bits from IKEA and fitted the whole thing. And somebody said to me, well, where did you make a plan that? I didn't. I did it all in my head.
So ADHD is basically like watching 30 different channels at the same time and somebody else is holding the remote control. I am calm in situations where a lot of other people get really anxious. There's limited fear to actually make a decision, which I sometimes find very helpful in a business context, because sometimes we just have to decide something to be able to move ahead.
I can hold very large, very complex systems in mind.
The way I look at the world is black and white. It's not the grey areas in between. I can think logically, I can think straight down the middle, and it brings the team in together so that it's not going round and round in circles.
I think one of the biggest challenges for me is that neurological differences are invisible. Don't assume everyone else, just because they look like you or they have a similar job or that they think in the exact same way.
I would say definitely don't be afraid to talk about it.
For me, I would say speak to your managers and let them be aware. And I think by doing that, it makes you more confident and more freer.
It's not something that all of us are easy talking about, but the more we do talk about it, the more people understand and will appreciate the different abilities and the different gifts that neurodivergent people can actually bring to HSBC.
If a
Okay, any questions from that video? The one thing we might need to remember too is that not everybody discloses or has been diagnosed. So just taking the tenets from this learning opportunity and applying it everywhere means that you're casting a net that serves everyone. So the research is telling us that executive functioning tasks are really hard for people that are neurodiverse. Time management and planning and executing schedules are hard. Social communication can be difficult. The one thing that I run into with my clients a lot is abstract language. I don't remember who the client was, but they were saying his boss said, well, I suggest you park over there. And anyways, he didn't park over there and he got in trouble for it because he took it as a mere suggestion, not as you need to park over there. So we do have to be thoughtful about our language. Lastly, difficulty concentrating can be hard. People that are neurodiverse, if there's too much information, they can become overwhelmed and then they shut down. And then they lose sight of what is important. And then I hear about rabbit holes. Like, I just went down this rabbit hole. I kept on following it, and then I forgot to do this. And that's sometimes what happens. So we're going to look at the challenges and how we can support in each of these areas. And people that are neurodiverse have problems with sensory things, communication, social, loneliness. We got to start talking about this one. Working outside of their special interest area can be a challenge. Self-advocacy or self-determination. Gender dysphoria. This one's going to be interesting. It's not common knowledge that people on the autism spectrum experience more gender dysphoria than their neurotypical peers. Concentrating and executive functioning. These are the challenges that are often associated with neurodiversity. And once again, I want to remind you that because it's a spectrum disorder, somebody might have a constellation of symptoms or challenges. They're not going to have every single one on that list. So when we look at sensory challenges, we can be really inclusive. There's so many strategies for this. So sensory challenges are usually going to be in the environment. One of the biggest complaints I hear is the lights. People with ADHD often can see the flicker of fluorescent lights, and it gives them headaches or just drives them bonkers all day long because there's the constant flicker. And temperature, sense can be really distracting to people that experience neurodiversity and people that don't, to be honest. So some strategies to be inclusive, to some sensory sensitive inclusive practices are providing agendas. We are all very comforted and by having an agenda. I think we all have an agenda on our phone or our paper agenda. And I think if I went and took that away from you, you'd be very upset. So fostering and supporting agendas, and like this summer with my team of students, I sent them Outlook invites to everything. So I knew they knew where they were supposed to be every minute of every day. Those poor kids this summer. So providing that support in that way. So that's actually giving them visual support. You know, giving different opportunities to share knowledge. Like rather than making it dense literature, think about using visuals, think about using auditories or tactiles or videos. Limiting stimulus on the walls. Overwhelming environments can be overstimulating for some people. Smells, seats, sounds, limiting discomfort. You might not be aware that something in your workspace is uncomfortable, but if it's brought to your attention, do your best to eliminate it. Allow for breaks and include movement throughout the day or opportunities for movement. Like you might see me every so often and I just have to swivel this chair just a little bit and it just gets me back into that perfect teaching zone. Being aware of support software that's out there, like Read and Write is software that you can use to do speech to text dictation, or you can use it to read text to you. So a lot of students with dyslexia or ADHD will use it in college, and it would be nice if they could actually carry that over to the workplace. Video tours of your work campus showing how things are working. I always think about like when I go into a new place and like there's a cafeteria or something, I'm like, oh, I don't know this system. I don't know how to order here. I don't know how this works. And I actually get kind of stressed out by things like that. But if I saw a video of like, in Canada, we have Tim Hortons, and when you get coffee, you order a double, and you actually do this when you do it. It's kind of weird. Anyways, because I haven't lived in Canada so long, I didn't know how to order a double, and I was very upset about it. And but if Tim Hortons had a video on their webpage of how to order a double, I would have done much better. allowing for fidgets or stim toys, or, you know, it's interesting. I just did some work with Boys and Girls Club, and there was a gentleman right at the front, and the whole time I was talking, he was doodling. And then he would look up and he would ask the best questions or demonstrate the most understanding of what I had just said. And then he came up and apologized to me afterwards. I'm like, why would you apologize for that? That was highly effective for you. So not always assuming that somebody's not attending to you because they're doodling. It might be their strategy. But you can also ask, hey, when you doodle, does that help you focus, or does it help you retain information? Learn about them. The other thing is to turn captioning on videos. Captioning isn't just for the hearing impaired, it's for the for people. There's some people with auditory processing disorders. It just supports a lot of people that you'd be surprised needed that kind of support. Okay, before I move on, are there any questions about inclusive sensory practices?
I just really like this list, and I've noticed, and I would say, I think you kind of touched on this, but folks that I've worked with, they say it this way of they need to know what done looks like. And again, it's sort of like you're like a video of what to do at the cafeteria. What does the final thing look like? And so giving an example, or if you're teaching someone something new, be like, this is what the end product is, and then they can get there. But not knowing what the end product is supposed to look like, then they sometimes can't even start. So that's always been really effective for me, is this is what done looks like.
You know, Emily, I've taught at the university for 11 years now, and it took me like the last 3 years, I finally started putting examples of my papers in my intro classes and stuff, because those kids don't know what done looks like.
Yep.
So yes, examples are very strong. One of the things I want to mention with sensory, I mentioned the lights flickering. This year at U of M, I got some grant money, and I have these really cool undergrads, and we developed a project to give products to classrooms that would make their classrooms more learner and sensory friendly. And one of them is you actually can buy light covers for fluorescent lights. So I actually put them in our classroom that we used for our autism camps this summer. And I just felt like everybody was happier with the light covers on. I felt like there was less behavior, less anxiety. It felt so calming and soothing in there. And we just got I felt like it was it was probably my best summer doing that program. But I really actually gave quite a bit of credit to those light covers, and it took that flicker and that harsh light off of us. Okay, communication deficits. This is something that Alicia had asked about. You know, somebody that stutters is classified as being neurodiverse, and then people with apraxia can be considered neurodiverse. So there are some rules that we have for when we communicate with them. We don't make remarks like slow down, take a breath, or relax. That's actually viewed as demeaning, and it actually will turn somebody off from communicating. Usually with those people that have speaking difficulties, we let them know that we're listening, and we focus on their words, not on how they say it. We maintain natural eye contact and wait patiently and naturally until the person is finished. And I recognize that this is really hard in our society because we are the competitive talkers. We talk fast because we think we have to get it in before the next person cuts us off, right? So these can be very hard to implement. You might want to finish somebody's sentences for them. Unless you're in a relationship with them, don't. People that have communication problems don't like that. Telephone calls, if you get a telephone call, if you get a call and you don't hear the person start talking right away, and you're not hearing the muffle at the background of the people that call and try and sell you things. I can't think of the word right now. Sorry. Telemarketers. Just wait a second. It might be somebody who stutters or has apraxia, or who's programming their device to say something on the phone to you. Try not to speak in a quickly. A lot of people with ADHD and autism benefit from slower rates of speech. And To be honest, it promotes good communication everywhere if you engage in this. So being active and considerate when speaking with all people is just your best practice. So I'm just going to look at the chat. There's a question here. Yeah, somebody wanted to know how we're going to talk about self-advocacy. Yes. Oh, so you're giving me new information about HR departments that it sounds like HR departments can be rigid. I'm not sure who wrote that, but when we get there, please pop in and let's problem solve some of this stuff. And quite frankly, send your HR department to this training. Social challenges. I misspelled challenges. No, I didn't. Okay. How many people have heard of the term masking? Okay, yeah, a couple of you. Good. So masking is what somebody does to fit in. So they essentially act like everybody else. And girls with autism are so good at this. So they don't get the support they need because you don't see that they have autism. So they wear this mask so they look like neurotypical people, and it helps them socially and behaviorally. And the reason why they do it is they want to avoid the stigma. A lot of people have been bullied that experience neurodiversity, and it fosters relationships. And quite frankly, that's how you get the job. That's how you get the date. That's how you get the good grade. So they fake it. However, the research is showing that this is an exhausting process for somebody to wear that mask all day long. And I think what we can do is create a safe environment where people can feel like they can be who they are and remove that mask. We just had an intern at our camp who was learning employment skills, and every so often he would just go to the back and jump on the trampoline and shake his hands like that. And I was like, I love that he feels like he can do that here. He just needed to. The kids were overwhelming him, and he would go and he'd jump on the trampoline and flap a little bit, and then he'd come back and start picking up crayons or what have you and helping us out. And I just thought, I am so happy that he feels like he can do that, that he feels that safe. And I think it would be my dream that everybody could have a trampoline at the back of their office where they could flap a little bit. But if we can create those environments, we can definitely support our employees. So with communication, sometimes we have to give feedback, and social skill feedback particularly. So there's this thing called the hidden curriculum. So neurotypical people learn social rules very quickly, very easily, and they literally learn them by watching others. It's Bandura's social learning theory. People with autism do not have that luxury. It doesn't make sense to them. And then people with ADHD, they may know it, but their impulse controls challenges keeps them from living it. So we can give gentle feedback. And I think if it's done with love, it doesn't hurt. If it's done with criticism and spite, then don't do it. If you can't be in the right place in your heart, then don't do it. So you can use when because statements. So when someone tells me their dog died, I usually say sorry for your loss, because pets can be family. So maybe it was a situation where somebody was crying in the break room and that person with autism didn't know what to say. When someone's arms are full, I offer to take a bag, because helping shows I care and builds relationships. So we're really giving them the why we do these things, because they might see that we do these things, but they don't understand that it's all about building relationships. When people are talking to me, I often point my body towards them, because then they know I'm listening. And this is a really important one. I want to really encourage people to step away from pushing eye contact and promote orienting body toward speaker, because my adults with autism are telling me that eye contact hurts. It physically hurts them. And they just, if they hear it one more time, hey, look me in the eye when I'm talking to you, that they just can't handle it anymore. And that's part of their masking, is they're making eye contact all day and it's hurting them. So if we can just teach them that orienting your body towards the speaker tells them you're listening, that can be some powerful information for them. But also let them know when they've done something that's amazing. So thanks for cashing out the drawer. That last customer kept me too long, and I appreciate the help. You know, always tell them why it was important to you. Our people on the spectrum need to know the why constantly. Thanks for taking my Saturday shift. Now I can go to my high school reunion and see old friends. You told them the why. Thanks for checking the dressing rooms. It totally slipped my mind. You are really good with detail. So complimenting them about their skills and thanking them. Explaining the why gives context and understanding to the social roles that aren't apparent to everyone. Okay, just a quick question. Are there questions? Loneliness is a real thing. And I remember when I was little, my dad saying to me, you know, you can be lonely in a crowd. I'm like, no. And then I remember really actually thinking about that statement and thinking, oh my gosh. And then, so now, like, seriously, I was 8 years old or something like that. Every time I'm in a crowd, I'm like, is he lonely? Is she lonely? I wonder if they're lonely. Because my heart just hurts for the people on the spectrum that experience loneliness. And it's interesting because I was just reading reports, and so many of the reports for these kids I work with, their parents said they seem to prefer to play alone. And actually, it's that they don't have the skills to join their friends. That's actually what that statement should be. And children, we can't expect children to be like top knowledge accommodation makers, but as adults, I think we can hold ourselves to that expectation. So we can decrease stigma. If we decrease stigma, that might increase social opportunity. So people want to succeed. We always have to remember that people want to succeed. What's hard is a third of classroom teachers and educators believe learning and thinking challenges are sometimes excuses for laziness. And that's usually those kids with ADHD. They get labeled as lazy. 76% of neurodivergent university students say they didn't disclose their disability to the university. Why? They're just so sick of the stigma of special education. We should accept employees that have accommodations and adhere to those accommodations. We need to really do our best. We should always try to presume intellect. Do not assume that based on a person's appearance or communication that they have less knowledge in their head. And just remembering and I feel like this might be going back to this question that was in the chat, that it's not our job to make everybody fit into this mold. It's our job to make sure everybody fits. Okay. So being accepting and presuming competence supports employees and colleagues. So this is kind of circling back to the little conversation we had about trauma. The tenets of trauma-informed care actually are the tenets of being a good human, to be honest. We should create environments that feel safe. We should create relationships that are trustworthy or transparent. If any of you have ever worked with somebody who had a hidden agenda, it is so disruptive. It's so interfering to not be able to trust that colleague or supervisor because they know that their agenda is not what everybody's agenda is. Peer support's really important, and we're actually going to talk about that a little bit later. And collaboration, mutuality, that we're all in this together, that we all have the same goal should be the priority of your workplace. Giving those people voice and choice, always trying to give choices. That's really empowering to anybody, not just people with neurodiversity. And then just being sensitive to cultural, historical, and gender issues. Once again, we don't know people's pasts, so we should just always be as sensitive. I think about one of the research classes I took for my doctorate. To be honest, I had no idea what the Nuremberg trials were, and they showed video, and I'm Jewish, and there was no trigger warning. I had no idea. I was traumatized so deeply that like I had a hard time returning to that classroom afterwards. I was associating those feelings with that whole classroom. And we just have to be really thoughtful and give people options that if they're uncomfortable, they have options to get out of that situation. So if we create safe spaces, we'll foster the opportunity to build relationships. And then including people in your plans. So we all know that our work becomes our social place because it does. It's unfortunate. We really should have lives outside of work. But it does happen. And, you know, it's actually kind of logical. You're in this field together. You guys love the same things. Why wouldn't you be buddies, right? Why wouldn't you hang out? So if there's plans at work, use those school birthday party rules. Everybody's invited. You know, you can't just invite half the class, either the whole class or none of the class. If communication is hard for somebody, find low demand activities. So going to movies, nobody talks during a movie. Laser tag, you yell a little bit, but you don't really have to communicate much. Concerts, so things where you're being entertained and it doesn't foster communication can be really inclusive for somebody who has communication challenges. If you're designing a work-related activity, make sure you get input from all your employees and make it as inclusive as possible. And then know that social media is important to belonging to particularly people with communication challenges. That can be their only social outlet. So somebody that's neurodiverse may not communicate well with you at work, but might be your best friend on Instagram and comment on all your photos. And that might be how they socialize. So be thoughtful about making sure you're being inclusive with your social media too. Just remember that everybody belongs and we have a duty to ensure that. So sometimes people can feel challenged in their work setting if their work is out of their special interest area. So what do we do to help? We identify the strengths and capitalize on them. And we always have to remember that creativity is a strength and abstract random thinking is a strength. Our culture somehow has encouraged us to see those as deficits. And I think we wouldn't be talking on Zoom right now if it weren't for abstract, random, and creative thinking. Those people that are the devil's advocates, like some of my clients with autism really like to, they like to challenge my thinking, and I kind of enjoy it. But rather than getting annoyed by it, letting it challenge you and think outside or from a different perspective, because it could make your product or your outcome better. If it's working for them, don't change it. It just like it doesn't have to fit into that rigid HR mold. If it's working and it's working for the company, keep it. Shaming is not a strategy to support people. We need to work with them to support them and help them be part of the solution. So fostering interest areas makes all employees happy and therefore productive. So somebody had brought this up about self-advocacy and self-determination. That video we just watched, there were people really encouraging people with neurodiversity to talk to their managers and tell them what they needed. Here's the reality, though, is sometimes we experience ableism out there. And people see those with neurodiversity as less than. And so it's really a personal choice if you're going to disclose your disability or even take on the role of self-advocacy. You really have to trust that person in order to engage in that. But what we do want to do is create an environment where somebody can ask for what they want for. And we're not saying that they get the moon. We're saying that they get to be comfortable. And that's about it, right? So like asking for what you need when you need it, like breaks, lights dimmed. That is the number one request when I teach is students ask me to turn off the lights. A meeting agenda. It's really uncomfortable to go into the unknown. So providing that structure to support those diverse learners. Written instructions. Often the requests that people make, they're not really that burdensome. You can meet them. It's just being human and being kind. And so we try to meet people where they're at. So we try to create a work culture where people are not afraid to ask for what they need. When we think about using the language, somebody had mentioned language before, there are some rules. So everybody that has autism has their own rules, which can make it interesting. Some people identify by their autism, so they'll refer to themselves as autistic. Some people prefer person-first language where they say they're a person with autism. Sometimes people don't even want to acknowledge it, and that's okay too. So we don't have to. It's really their choice. So if somebody discloses their neurodiversity, you can ask how they prefer, like, are you okay with me talking about it? Are you okay with, do you prefer autistic or person with autism? Ask the questions because it shows you care. And then sometimes people are like, oh, I only told you because I trust you. Let's not talk about this with anybody else. That's fair too. So the rule on that one is you ask. Some people will embrace the term disability. Me personally, because neurodiversity impacts my family, I'm not a big fan of that word because it feels like a barrier. I do prefer neurodivergent, but you know, some people want to be referred to as a stutterer. Maybe they prefer dysfluent, dyslexic, ADHD. You just have to ask, and if their comfort level with it, and that might require you establishing a relationship first. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of people on the autism spectrum experience gender dysphoria and acceptance. And there's just new research coming out about this. And they experience it more than neurotypical people. So the one thing is, like, I like when I look on here and I see, like, you know, Heather has her pronouns up, and I have my pronouns up, and so does Alicia. You know what? I think I've been saying your name wrong. It's Aisha. Aisha. Okay, sorry about that. You know, I think it's important that even if we're not stepping outside the gender norms, we do put our pronouns up because it actually shows inclusion and acceptance of our gender dysphoric peers. If you're not sure about, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say a comment because I have quite a few trans friends and family members that I love seeing the pronouns up, but be careful if you're in an environment where you're requiring people to do it, because I've had folks that are somewhere in the middle and they don't know which one to choose yet, or they don't, you know, they don't want to come out as maybe one or the other. So as long as people aren't required to put their pronouns on things.
That's great. That's really good advice, Emily. And yeah, and that's that voice and choice and following along with trauma-informed care. But if you're unsure what they prefer, ask. And then if I'm unsure, I've just been going with they, using the they pronouns. Now I have to tell you, as a speech therapist, using plural pronouns where they don't apply has been so difficult for me. And I feel like I should wash my mouth out with soap when I do it, because I'm breaking rules, I'm breaking grammar, but I've really trained myself to embrace it and be okay with it. And hey, if I can do it, you can do it. Because 27 years of grammar in my profession, but just being really thoughtful about this area. One thing to be thoughtful too about is embracing new names. So as people are discovering who they are in terms of gender, they might realize that their name doesn't match who they are, and they might change their name. And we need to be thoughtful about this. Like, if they change their name, they're probably on the process of eventually legally changing their name. And if you hear them refer to their old name as their dead name, you know that they've committed. Okay. So being okay with, like, I know, like, U of M has aliases for emails. So if somebody changes their name, like they get married or they change their first name, they can actually give you an alias email. And so both emails will go to your email address. So you know, that's an IT request. You know, changing the signage on their door, that's fine. It just really shows that you accept them and you respect their choices. Also, getting away from language like ma'am and sir. I'm Canadian. I've never used those words, but apparently you guys like those words. So just gravitating away from ma'ams and sirs unless there is a preference. My son had a speeding ticket and he had to go to court, and the judge kept on waiting for him to say sir. And my son kept on looking at me. I'm like, I don't know what he's waiting for. And it was just definitely a preference, a cultural thing. And finally the judge said, we say sir here. I'm like, so sorry. But just being aware of those. So our word preferences and choices alone can show our acceptance and support. Concentrating can be hard, and concentrating usually is related to time of day. And I think we all know this. Sometimes people can be cognitively on all day long. Some people have their rhythms, and they may follow their circadian rhythms throughout the day. What you have to decide as a supervisor is how flexible you can be with work windows. And I think this goes back to that HR question, is how flexible can we be? Like, if it's not a storefront, do you have to follow 8 to 5 rules? Like, but you know, it's a hospital and you have nursing shifts, you have to pick day or night, right? So we have to think about what, and I'm not saying you have to change your whole systems. It's just, what are the allowable flexibilities for those people? So here's the big one, executive functioning challenges. This is really the biggest barrier for our friends with autism and ADHD and other neurodiversities. So I don't have time for this video. If we have time at the end, I'll circle back for it. So executive functioning, how many people have heard the term executive functioning? Okay, so we know the term, we know that it's part of who we are as employees, right? Okay, so there are some people that aren't familiar with it. Executive functioning, that lives in our frontal lobe. And as we learned earlier in the presentation, that's the area that's most affected by neurodiversity. And it's kind of our organization system, that air traffic controller, where it plans and organizes and executes and starts tasks and leads us to task completion. So what executive functioning involves is high levels of cognitive functions. We need to learn to plan, organize, and execute. Prioritize. Oh my gosh, that's hard. Priority is hard. Managing emotions. If you can't manage your emotions, it can be very interfering to your work or your life. Working effectively and efficiently and regulating behavior. So when we look at the goals and problem solving area, there's planning, there's organization, time management, working memory. So working memory is when we hold information while we're doing complex tasks. So essentially we bring information into our working memory, and then we bring existing information down, and it kind of grabs it and draws it into the brain. But if we can't hold it in the working memory long enough for our long-term memory to grab it, we never learn it. And metacognition. Metacognition is this ability to self-assess. Am I doing it right? Am I meeting my deadlines? Am I meeting expectations? Things like that. It's funny, my son has like a job and he had his first performance eval and he gave himself outstanding all the way down. I'm like, really? you know, 3 months on the job and you're outstanding all the way down. And he's like, I do a good job. I'm like, okay, I trust you. But I don't know if he understood how that stuff worked. Self-management is also part of executive functioning. So response inhibition. This is hard for people with ADHD because sometimes they can't just take that second to process before they say something. And then they spend more, it just creates kind of one of those rabbit holes, which can make it very difficult for relationships. Emotional control, I think this can be very difficult, especially us as a whole right now coming off of a pandemic. We've been living in fear for a couple of years, and we're all pretty raw, and we're all kind of have a certain level of dysfunction or broken and bad feelings about the pandemic. So this can be hard right now for people. Keeping attention, task initiation. Oh my gosh, this can be so hard. Some of my clients that I work with don't want to start a task unless they can finish the task. So if there's an hour left in their workday, they don't want to start it because they don't want to restart it tomorrow. They want to just get it all done. Flexibility. Flexibility can be very difficult for people on the autism spectrum. And goal-directed persistence. Developing a goal and working until you achieve that goal. So that's what executive functioning, it's a long list, but it's our employable list, right? This is what makes us employees. Oops, I keep on clicking the wrong thing, sorry. So how can we support people with executive dysfunction? There are so many ways. We could do self-assessments and check-ins. If you have them do self-assessments, it can help identify where they need more support or where they need changes. However, I want to caution you that for people that are neurodiverse, metacognition, that ability to assess yourself, can be hard. So like my son giving himself all 5s, that might happen with your employee or your colleague, and they may not realize that they have a deficit in one area. But if that's the case, then you sit down and you do it with them and you give examples like, does this look like you? You're always at work on time and things like that. And after doing the self-assessment, you should be able to come up with a plan for support. So you can use a Likert scale, kind of like the one that Emily provided at the beginning. And here's the assessment items, and these are related to executive functioning, okay? I have my materials. I have an organization system. I'm on time for work and meetings. Task completion, taking notes in meetings. This is important because I feel like in those meetings, we impart a lot of expectations. And if you don't take notes, you're going to forget them and you're not going to do it. One of the things I hear from people with ADHD so much is, I don't remember. I don't remember. I don't remember. Being flexible when work requires it, meeting productivity expectations, and managing time. So these questions can be altered pending your work environment. But here's the secondary assessment. And these are the other things that make the workplace enjoyable. I fit in at work. We all want to fit in at work, right? I have colleagues that I can ask for help. I have a work-life balance. This is hard. I feel safe at work. We don't want anybody not to feel safe at their work. I can talk to my supervisor about the supports I need. My schedule supports my productivity needs. I communicate well with my peers. I am enjoying my work. I feel sensory comfortable at work. So this could be your supplemental self-assessment to see if there's any supports your employee needs. And so after somebody does that self-assessment, you can have that interview and you can ask them like, hey, what does fitting in look like for you? Or can you give me some examples of your sensory discomforts? And it's like, oh yeah, those lights are flickering. Oh yeah, we can order those light things. Or do you know about those light things? Tell me about your organizational system. This is usually a big deficit. This is what I usually am working on with my college students with autism. And if you could design your work schedule, what would it look like? Maybe we have them working in non-productive hours for them. Maybe they're the nurse that needs to be on the night shift rather than the morning shift. Support plans should help the employee develop the skills leading to independence. So we want these to be short-term, but we want to give them the skills so they stay long-term, right? We could do weekly meetings for planning and problem solving. We could do structured peer support. And the reason why I want the word structured there is you really can't just partner somebody up and expect that they know how to support another person. So you probably have to help that process as a supervisor. Guides on how to, like those resource guides, but rather than a dense page of print, how about a video? I feel like in general, our minds are doing better with video content than print. You could do ongoing self-assessments to track change. You can have the employee set goals. And then the next part is outside supports. So this might be stuff you don't know. If you have an employee that's struggling with executive dysfunction, you can refer to a speech therapist. You can refer to an occupational therapist, or you can send them to an ADHD coach, or you can tell them about this, that these are their options if they need this kind of support. People don't know this information, and I'm sharing it with you. So the one thing in Montana we do have an abundance of is speech therapists. So this could be a very easy find and a very local find. And it also is a great telepractice a great way to use telepractice. So they could be in their office doing their executive functioning planning and learning and online, and their materials are right there to use. Occupational therapists, this is actually something they do too. However, not abundant in Montana. We are getting more because we've had a few programs start up, but they're not as easy to find, but they still do the same work. And then ADHD coaches. If your insurance isn't going to cover speech or OT, ADHD coaches are usually much more affordable, and they actually provide the same service. They just, they're just not, they don't have the same level as training as we do in those areas of cognition. Okay, so there are some evidence-based practices. So I'm a girl of research. I did a whole doctorate to learn that I don't want to be the person doing the research. I want to be the person using the research. Wow. That was a lot of learning, very little learning and a lot of experience. The research said, this list is from the research, and there's something called antecedent-based interventions, and that's essentially getting ahead of the challenges. So, you know, making sure that you don't have the flickering lights in your office, keeping a scent-free environment, just creating that environment to be welcoming to any learner or visitor, regardless of their diversity. Self-management, this is once an employee learns skills, like say they decide to go to speech therapy, you can help them engage in a self-management plan to maintain their executive functioning. Cognitive behavioral intervention, essentially it's, if I change my thoughts, I can change my feelings. And hooking somebody up with a counselor can be very beneficial, because what happens with executive dysfunction is you start seeing yourself as a failure, and then you start seeing everything as a barrier, and then you get into negative self-talk. And if somebody can help you get a positive state of mind and a more problem-solving, proactive state of mind, you can tackle that differently. Social narratives. This actually just explains what's expected in a social setting. And I'm going to give you an example in a moment. Peer-mediated instruction and intervention. This is where you would have a structured work peer. Social skills training. You can actually refer that person to a speech therapist for social skills training if they are really needing it. Task analysis. Sometimes, like Emily was saying, like end product is important, but then we can engage in backward design, like what are your steps to get to that end product, and give that person the outline of their work. Video modeling. I'm going to give you an example of video modeling in a moment, but we're finding that our neurodiverse learners, particularly those with dyslexia, dysgraphia, autism, ADHD, learn more through video than through print. Modeling is just demonstrating what it looks like. Scripting, providing scripts to support challenging situations with routine verbalizations, like welcome to McDonald's, may I take your order? Would you like fries with that? Like those scripts are going to be important. They need to be in print. They need to be accessible. Visual supports. these are your calendars, your checklists, anything, your in and out procedures, anything visual to support those procedures that might be hard to quickly commit to memory, because remember that working memory doesn't do well, so they need the visual supports to support that. So this is a social narrative. And it also depends on your employee. You could just say to your employee, hey, when our meetings get loud and you want to talk, just raise your hand. Okay, that's a social narrative. However, maybe you have a person on your crew that needs more support. You could do something like this. If a meeting is loud and I want to turn to talk, I raise my hand. This gives the facilitator information that I want to talk. Raising my hand is a way to break into a conversation. So, and what I like about social narratives is it tells what to do and answers the question why. Okay, so here is a video model of, this is what a video model might look like if you're showing somebody how to do a phone call.
Hi, this is Jen calling. Good. I'm calling because tomorrow we're going swimming and I need a swimsuit and towel. If you have any questions, you can call me back at 243-2405. I hope to hear from you. Bye.
So that was just an example of what a phone call might look like. That video model is gonna do more than make sure you're in a quiet setting, make sure you have notes in front of you, make sure they can look at this and see what being prepared looks like for that phone call. However, here's my saving grace. Our internet is full of video models. I fixed my washing machine by watching a do-it-yourself video model. I saved myself hundreds of dollars in money. This is a YouTube video. I'm not playing it for you because you do not need to watch this, but it's how to do a Chroma Alpha in Excel. And if it weren't for this video model, I would have not done well in my research class. So just thinking that there's actually a lot out there free and easy to support your employees. Visual supports, anytime you can have visual supports, you're gonna support every learner in your environment. So one of the things I've been thinking about, and I think this is gonna be a new standard for email, I'm gonna try it this fall and see how people respond to it, is when I get a dense email, I usually wanna cry. First I think about crying. I loved emailing with Emily. She was so brief and to the point. You're just such a good emailer, Emily. You need to know that. But people don't read it if it's dense. So I think I'm going to start doing my emails with the critical points, because I know these 2 bullets will get read and the 5 paragraphs of explaining what was stolen won't. So I think I'm going to try this in the fall, just as a visual support and to reduce that visual information. Task analysis is a great support tool. It's a very evidence-based support tool. And this is where you put together the tasks that need to be done, like your cleanup or your check-in, check-out, or stocking shelves, or how to make brisket. I don't know. This one has a lot of visual supports, but depending on your employee, you can adjust it to whatever they need. Scripts, particularly for a stutterer or an apraxic person or anybody neurodivergent, is so helpful because first of all, stutterers will, if they're reading, it will decrease the amount of stuttering and take away a lot of the anxiety if you know what you're going to say. So I thought this one was kind of funny. If you hired somebody that was neurodivergent, you could give them this script to quit their last job. So this is an example of a script. So I have a video I want to share with you.
When I was diagnosed with autism, the psychologist explained it like there were very limited career capacity for me.
Before I came to Microsoft, I was struggling to get employment, and I had these skills in math, but nobody was giving me interviews, and it didn't seem to be going well. I worked a couple of minimum wage jobs. It was work, it paid the bills, but I definitely could feel that I was destined for something more.
I feel like I get to have a pretty significant impact on Microsoft.
By having people with disabilities in the fabric of our company, you're building in a diverse workforce that then represents the 1 billion people with disabilities out there. We're going to be building better products, we're going to be building better services, websites, anything that we do will work across the spectrum of being human.
And so every time we get an opportunity to bring somebody in who can see things from a different angle, every time that happens, that's where we find these great creative types who can come in and help us deliver the things that we care about.
I'm Cody Takeyoshi, and I'm a software engineer at Xbox Live.
My name is Joey Chemis, and I'm a data scientist here at Microsoft.
MJ Gardner, software engineer on Azure build pipelines and engineering systems.
There is just an incredibly high unemployment and underemployment rate when it comes to autism. Our traditional hiring process, that's not going to allow someone with autism to show up and show their strengths.
For me, the autism hiring program was the chance to finally, make it. You're saying, here's the things that come with autism that the standard interview process would flag. Here's how we accommodate those issues and make them less of an issue. And here's how we allow the person to really shine and show their true colors and abilities.
I think this is just a better way of evaluating. This is just probably a better way for anyone.
People are looking for companies that reflect humanity. There is incredible talent out there in the marketplace that should be in our company.
This program has given me a mirror to reflect on the things that make me different, or how could I maybe change the way that I work in order to bring some of these experiences forward.
My hope for the future is that we won't see this as a program, but instead a natural way to recruit key talent in our organizations.
So if I was talking to a younger version of myself, I would let myself know that you're gonna do really cool things and that you're gonna major in math, you're gonna really love it, and that you're gonna end up getting a really cool job at Microsoft that you just enjoy. The people, the work, the type of problems that are being solved.
So to be here is just really cool. I'm very proud of where I am.
So in that video, Microsoft references they actually have an autism hiring program, but the reality is that I have a bunch of people here already thinking about their inclusion strategies, and you don't need special hiring programs. Microsoft probably does because they really want that talent. But I think in Montana, we definitely can just embrace a more neurodiverse friendly lens and create environments to support our friends and colleagues with neurodiversity. So today we've talked about what neurodiversity is, the benefits of it, ways to support neurodiversity. Do you have any questions or problems for our last 12 minutes? Yeah.
Trying to formulate a question. I'll see if I can talk my way through it. But I was just kind of hypothetically wondering, like, say you've got a coworker, an employee that you're sort of recognizing some of these, and they're struggling with some of these executive dysfunction things. But maybe they, kind of come from, maybe they've internalized like stigma against autism or things like that, and they're sort of resistant to getting, to asking for help, or they want to do things the way that everyone else does them. They're sort of resistant to doing things their own way. How would you approach trying to help them? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm also very aware of Aisha's comments too. sorry, the poll just popped up on our screen here. Are you guys seeing that? And it sounds like you guys are feeling pretty confident with what you've learned today, which I find very exciting. So yeah, age is a complicating factor. Stigma is a complicating factor. You know, sometimes the diagnosis isn't the most important thing. We actually have a lot of people in neurodiversity groups, how are they terming it? Self-diagnosed or self-assessed autism, where they're assigning, they haven't been diagnosed yet, but they're saying that they're identifying as autistic. I think we, as a community, we have to not focus on, hey, did you know you're autistic? Hey, you know, like that's kind of hard, right? But it can be, hey, can you let me help you with this? Hey, I have this system that works. Can I share it with you? Where you don't have to point out their shortcomings. You can just say, hey, I have this way, you want to try it? And maybe that could open up a conversation. And where they say, yeah, just everything I do seems to be so hard. I just can never start a task. And when I do, I sit up till like 3 a.m. finishing it. And then I'm exhausted the next day. It's like, oh yeah. Have you ever heard of executive dysfunction? It's a real thing, you know, and like maybe it'll start the conversation. Did that help, Amanda?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was just kind of thinking, totally hypothetically, but yeah, I think, you know, I actually, you know, full disclosure, like I was pretty recently diagnosed ADHD. I'm 37. And so, you know, yeah, just like the gal in the video, like a lot of things fell into place when, you know, you go, oh, like, yeah, I'm not lazy. I'm not, you know, all of these things. But I think, you know, kind of, yeah, before that, like trying to, you know, beat your head against the brick wall, just trying to, you know, get, just be, you know, functioning in society, you know, and I don't know how to kind of, you know, if I see it in someone else, how to, you know, gently, you know, yeah, approach it.
I think being human is like so amazing, and just saying, you know, I had those same challenges when I first started working here. Can I help you out with this?
Yeah.
You know, but also recognizing, like Amanda, my guess is that you also are trying to negotiate 37 years of feeling like you were lazy and like you were underproductive, only to realize you were probably the hardest working person anywhere, everywhere, right? So, you know, it brings a lot. And, you know, that's the line in that video that resonates with me too, is when that woman says, I finally understood myself. Understanding yourself and accepting yourself are two different things. And I think it can be part of somebody's healing process too, to reach out and support others so they don't have to go through what they went through. So yeah. I love that your heart is there. I love that you're thinking about this. And I think when that situation happens, I think you're going to be the right person to be there.
Thanks. I hope so.
I hope so too. Yeah. Aisha was actually asking about older adults too. That's a little bit harder because generationally, some of our colleagues that are like a little bit older, like seriously, I feel like I'm walking such a generation line here. Disability is affiliated with shame. And from their generation point, like probably people 40 and older affiliate shame with disability, and they were taught to be shameful of it. So that can be a harder thing to work with. It can be so painful for them. However, you know, your colleague is on their 20th job, in their lifetime and they're about to lose this job, do you intervene? Like, how do you help them, right? Because you just realize this pattern is not healthy for them. So I think I don't have the answers for that, Aisha, but I think you've recognized something that's very challenging, and it's basically what society was while these people were being raised, that disability is shameful, disability is bad. And, you know, just creating that culture of accepting differences and supporting others can really just be the first step. But to be honest, I don't think I have good advice in this area, other than just being open and receptive to those people and their needs. Karen asked about accommodations in the workplace. So the accommodations I was referring to were just us being good people. You know, it's like, it's not like, you know, unfortunately, all the ADA accommodations seem to be about mobility, not about cognitive, right? It's about having a wheelchair ramp or having an elevator on staff. But I think if you're in a supervisory position and you want to embrace and support neurodiversity, the accommodations you make are out of being a good leader, because leadership is a person that comes alongside their employees, not barks down at their employees. And just being okay with what you're offering and being okay saying to your other employees, well, they needed this, they asked for it because they needed it. And like, you know, it's just like, that's what I do with my kids. They're like, why does he get a wiggle cushion? Oh, he asked for it and he needed it. And the kids are like, oh, okay. So just being okay with your decisions, right? But to be honest, I'm not, a lot of the ADA accommodations are to do with mobility. And that's another thing that we have to change our lens on. I think, you know, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I'm just thinking, like with dyslexia, there are like you would be required to buy a screen reader or what have you for your employee if they had reading challenges. But I think where people get hung up is when the person for ADHD asks for a screen reader because they do better when they're hearing it than reading it, or they need to hear and read it. And they're like, well, you don't have dyslexia, you can have that. It's like, well, why not? If it makes you a better employee, why not? So I don't have a great answer, Karen. I'm sorry.
I will say that the Zoom world we've been in over the last few years has changed things to the degree of like, I was never too, like I usually fidgeted a little bit, like I usually had like a pen. But when I'm on a Zoom call, I can like play a game on my phone. Nobody can tell. It's not disrespectful. And I can take in the information because that's a good way for me to do it. And now I have the challenge of meeting people in person now and having to have that thing of like, I'm not ignoring you. I'm not, you know, it seems so disrespectful. That was always the idea. And I want to be like, no, I'm actually listening closer if I can play this dumb game on my phone at the same time. And that I didn't even realize how useful that was until Zoom, and I started doing it. So new things.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Emily. And I think that also comes with self-advocacy. It's like, hey, it might look like I'm on my phone, but I'm actually doing better listening if I engage my brain this way too. If I know that as your talker, as your teacher, as your supervisor, I'm going to be okay with it. Right? Emily doesn't disappoint, so this must work for her, right? So, folks, we've hit 12 o'clock. On the screen are my email addresses. Whoopsies. Whoopsies. I was actually, I can put them in the chat if you would like them. Oh, they're in your handout. I knew I had it somewhere. This is a book by Marcia Schreiner, and I actually have this other book called The Neurodivergent Job Candidate that I've really enjoyed reading her stuff. Like seriously, she writes for neurodivergent people. It's like short. It's a short book. I loved it. It was so good. But you know, anything by Marcia Schreiner, I would look into if you need more. This is an image of the light covers that we put in our classroom this summer. And then this, oh shoot, this is the link for, I'll put it in the chat, for that video on human diversity. So please don't be afraid to email me if you have questions or ideas or thoughts. And I hope you got what you wanted out of the talk today.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you everyone for showing up today. It was great to see some faces. And like she said, feel free to get a hold of her with questions. Thanks for coming.